we've got this revenue sharing thing coming up, right? Everybody knows that. It's going to change the way money is doled out. It will come directly from the schools. Theoretically, it's a way that's going to make the playing field in terms of what everybody can pay much more even. As long as you can hit the $20.5 million rev share cap, all other NIL deals are going to have to be fair market value, and it's no more just pay for play beyond that. So we're going to get guardrails. Essentially, everybody that's been crying about guardrails, like the guardrails are here, but will they work? Will they work? And is it actually, if you're a Big 12 fan, are the guardrails actually a good thing? That's another question I would raise. If you're an ACC fan, are the guardrails actually a good thing? Is this something that could actually wind up helping the Power 2 as opposed to the entire Power 4? That's a question that I think we need to raise here. There's a new article that's out from ESPN. Pete Thamel and Dan Wolken teamed up to write this. Some of it is pretty funny because it talks. They interviewed Nevin Shapiro, who was the booster from Miami, if you can remember him, who got tied up in a Ponzi scheme. And then because of that, it came unraveled that he estimated he had spent like $3 million, basically just paying for meals and boats and cars and all sorts of things for Miami football players. Very stereotypical Miami things. They talked to him about it. He was like, I don't see any way that they can enforce this. And lots of coaches expressed some skepticism about this being enforceable as well. So here's what we have. I want to read you some of this article and then react to this and what it means for the Big 12, because I do think it's a legitimate question. Rick Pitino says, I think it's a flawed system before it gets started. Totally flawed. So Rick Pitino's totally out. Bill Self says, I think enforcement will be very hard. Although Self would later go on to say he thinks it's a good idea in theory, but the key there is theory. Matt Painter said we have zero trust. That's Purdue head basketball coach Matt Painter. We have zero trust. So nobody seems to be really buying that this is going to work out well to have Deloitte, an auditing company, taking care of enforcement of anybody who doesn't give a fair market value deal or is trying to circumvent the cap or break the rules here. There's not a lot of confidence about that. If you want a brief refresher here, okay, anything beyond the $20.5 million there, which this is where men's basketball actually becomes really caught in a tough spot, because football, you're going to have to devote, most schools are going to have to devote about 75% of that $20.5 million to football to be competitive at the top of the sport. And so then men's basketball kind of gets trapped. Like, all right, well, top 5 NIL spenders are spending upwards of like $10 million this past year, and that's probably going to go up this year. You're not going to have that if you're a big school that has to spend all that money on football. So you're going to need these extra NIL deals to hit if you're going to keep up the same sort of spend on men's basketball. That's why the Big East, there's been all this talk about the Big East having an edge there because they won't have football to worry about. They can devote more money toward men's basketball. Any NIL deal, if you want to do the extra NIL deals, any NIL deal that's over $600 has to be for a valid business purpose, and that will go through Deloitte, this clearinghouse. Deloitte plans to use data from past endorsement deals signed by college and pro athletes, along with other info to pinpoint whether or not each deal exceeds fair market value. That's the plan. That's the idea. This also, like, none of this would be done through the NCAA. It will be an entity separate from the NCAA that's being set up by the power conferences. So this new enforcement arm will have nothing to do with the NCAA. No more making jokes about the NCAA's impotence and trying to come down on major programs and all that. You won't be getting mad at them. You'll be getting mad at this new entity. The settlement will give them some new tools. This new entity will have some new tools, according to the article, a binding arbitration process that could speed up resolutions, provide the new enforcement group with greater power to compel coaches and schools to turn over evidence, and make it more difficult to challenge punishments in court. I mean, that may be the part that I'm the most skeptical about, because everything that's happening right now is anybody gets anything doled down to them by the NCAA. Think like, Tennessee. When they had something, they were like, no, we'll sue you and just get rid of this. Even athletes and their eligibility right now, it's like, well, we'll just sue the NCAA and I'll find a way to get another year. I mean, everybody's winning lawsuits right now. So I guess I will believe it when I see it as far as that goes. But this is how people in college athletics are viewing this. Purdue athletic director Mike Babinski said, we've arrived at sort of a tipping point for the enterprise as a whole. We're either going to suck it up and just take a little medicine and get it right for the long haul, or God knows where we're going over here over the next however many years. And none of that would be good. I think we have one shot to try to get this thing. And so we've got to do it. We've got to do it. Almost, kind of an administrator speaking from a sort of desperate place there. Like, hey, it's now or never. It's this, or we're never going to get this right. Like, we don't have another chance. I don't know. It feels to me that if you're going to create like a super league or like something new happens in the 2030s, I feel like you could probably tweak rules and strut governance and all that at that point, and you might have another shot. But I can understand the sense of urgency here where they're saying, like, who knows what it would look like by the time you get there. If you have 5 more years of an escalating market where, last year, the big story in college basketball was that Coleman Hawkins was getting $2 million. Now we're hearing people talk about in this article, Kelvin Sampson. It was mentioned that Kelvin Sampson had inquired about somebody and found out it would be $2.5 million. Like, those numbers are going to keep going up. And, what happens if you produce another 5 years of that? What's the market going to look like? I understand. I do understand how people start to think like that. But part of the problem is, man, here. So they say the architects of this new system believe coaches and admins are so fed up with the past few years of lawlessness that they will accept the enforcement group's authority rather than run to the nearest attorney general's office to challenge any investigative action. So they think that idealistically, everybody will be like Purdue's athletic director and be like, look, this is our only shot. So even if we get news that we don't like, they say our NIL deal for our star isn't fair market value. They're trying to punish us. They're saying somebody's ineligible, whatever. We'll just shut up and take the medicine for the greater good of the sport. I don't know, man. To me, that's just such a naive view. That is such a naive view of how everything in college athletics works, man. It's just greed to the nth degree. It's what you're seeing all over the country. It's what you see in our sports. It's certainly what you see in college sports right now. I cannot see a school just like an SEC school. If that happens to Georgia, that happens to Texas, you think Texas is just going to be like, oh, well, yeah, for the greater good of the sport, we'll just sit back and not try to sue somebody. You know how many law degrees there are of people with 7 and 8 figures worth of money at Texas that are going to come in and try to just sue the pants off of whatever this enforcement arm is going to be called, this nameless enforcement entity. It will happen. It will definitely happen. I can guarantee you that. Now, the most interesting angle on this, I think, if you're a Big 12 or an ACC fan right now, which obviously many of you are here on this channel, like how does this, like, what does this mean for the Big 12? Because I think, everybody, most people, your average fan is going to kind of applaud this and be like, yeah, we've got to get guardrails up. We've got to get this under control. This is crazy. And I do agree with the Purdue athletic director there in general. Like, yeah, this would be for the greater good of the sport if that can be figured out and there's some way to actually make some of this stick and there's a way to actually do this. Get the guardrails up in place, signing contracts where you're not literally a free agent every single year. Even like look at professional sports. That's not how it works. You sign a contract. Now, a lot of this, again, is like if they would just admit that they're employees and go that route, this would all be a lot easier. I get it. But if there's some way to start implementing actually some of that and give it some teeth and have it stick, that would, I think, be in the best interest of everybody generally. But in the short term, let's think about how that affects the Big 12. I put Cody Campbell of Texas Tech on the slide for this video, the thumbnail. Cody Campbell's a multi-billionaire, and he could bankroll about whatever he wants at Texas Tech and has. And that's why they're sitting here with arguably the best portal class in the country in football, competing right with all the SEC schools, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU, SEC Big Ten schools up at the top there. They're right there. You can certainly argue they got the best portal class in the country. Is it going to be a good thing for Texas Tech then if it comes back to like, hey, no, you can't just dip into the donors' pockets like that anymore. You're going to have to rev share, and then everything else will have to be fair market value NIL deal. What does that mean in Lubbock, Texas? What does that mean if you're going to do something for one of Cody Campbell's companies or whatever it might be? Like, what is fair market value for that? How is that determined? It's going to cut down a lot of your advantage right now in this, freewheeling environment where you can just spend money as recklessly as you want if you've got the guy like a Cody Campbell with that sort of backing to throw the cash around. So that could actually be a bad thing there. You could certainly argue that that would be a bad thing, that this environment has allowed some schools to massively overpay and buy better rosters because of it. Doesn't always work when we talk about overpaying. I think it's very clear that happened a lot with K-State's roster, and it's not even Coleman. Coleman Hawkins is the least of the problems on that. I mean, if people knew what the rest of the roster was making, you can overpay and land more talented players theoretically because of that. Jerome Tang came on our podcast, 3 months, said before the season, like, hey, we're in an environment where you give me the money, we can put together a national championship roster. That was his pitch. Like, get us the money now. We'll go buy the roster before they put the guardrails up and stop us from being able to do that. So I think that's already like a feeling, even within some that are not the traditional powers. Because if it goes back to, hey, everything's kind of normal, everyone's pretty equal in the amount of money that they can pay. One, and I have seen you guys in the comments there, yes, that brings up cheating as a big time possibility, and you're going to see a lot more of that. And, Gene Taylor expressed that. I played you guys that clip the other day. That's absolutely true. But also it just kind of tilts it back to like what it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, where it's like, yeah, the big schools that can sell their tradition, that can sell their coach. It kind of goes back to like the traditional ways to recruit become important. If the money is relatively the same, then all of a sudden the old powers will be back in the game, back having the extra edge, because they'll be able to sell all the things that they were selling before. Now, the transfer portal will still cut out some of that. If guys are still free to leave, they won't be able to stockpile as much talent like that. But you get the idea. One other point that I would make here is that in this new era, you're going to want to have a good GM. And that will be a skill set that I think will become really important. And like you're already seeing like Stanford going this type of route with like, hey, let's go find a super smart guy in Andrew Luck and have him run things as the GM. And he already fired a coach, I mean, he's basically operating now like an NFL GM. He fired Troy Taylor. You may see that become a really important position here, because one way you can get an edge if the money's all the same is, hey, find the value guys. Find the value guys that'll cost less money. I'm a Chiefs fan. Like, I hear these conversations constantly on Kansas City sports radio. Like, how do you get down and dirty in the draft? Find the cheap talent to put around Patrick Mahomes, because that contract is getting so big now. And like, that's the way you've got to win. Well, that's the way you will win in college football. Then if the money's about equal, find your bargains every year, place those around the expensive guys, figure out a way to fit in more expensive high roller type of guys. If you can get better, cheap talent to surround them, like, the GM becomes a much more important role. You just think about the structure of actual professional sports. I see Brian. I want to make this point. Have a GM that has good contacts with agents. Yes. I mean, have a GM that has friends in the industry that can be real about what other people are being offered other places. Like, that's something I continue to hear more and more about, that I think may have happened in an adverse way to a lot of people. Maybe some that aren't that hard to figure out here and what I'm talking about, but that you can kind of get duped. Like, if you're only talking to agents, they'll tell you, oh yeah, my guy's got XYZ offer on the table. My guy's getting offered $1 million by multiple schools. You better come in higher than that. And then, you come in at 1.3 or something, when in reality, the highest offer that was out there was 500,000. Well, then you just massively overpaid. So yeah, having a GM that has the contacts to be able to avoid that type of thing, can become very important. If you have a now limited pool of money and everybody's got the same sort of pool of money, how do you manage your money? These will all be tentacles to this and ways this can all change. And I think that's what we have to see how it all plays out. Because then another part of it too will there be more legal challenges? Will all of this actually hold up? We don't really know. So it's hard to definitively say this will be good, this will be bad for the Big 12. It's hard to really know, because we'll have to just let it all go and unwind and see what challenges there are, how the dust settles, and then take it from there. But there is a way that I think in the short term, this is definitely bad for some Big 12 schools, particularly like a Texas Tech. And honestly, maybe even if you wanted to expand that out to BYU, another place that I think has a lot of money and ready to spend it right now. And, if there are no guardrails, they can do a lot of damage with that. See, like AJ DeBonsta. coming in next year, right? I mean, you can take advantage of that, take full advantage of that. You may not be able to as much, or you'll have to either cheat, which I certainly don't see BYU doing, or you'll just have to get more savvy with the way you're doing this, hire a great GM, find some way to get the best NIL deals out there, because everybody will be working that angle too. I mean, that'll be the funny thing, to see everybody trying to work the angle of like, okay, how do we circumvent this system as well as we can with these fair market value NIL deals? Anyway, a lot to shake out there.